Who are the top tight ends to draft on Underdog for the 2021 NFL season? I'm going to give you my top 5 and explain why they stand out to me. Let's get into it. Coming in at number 5, we have TJ Hockenson. His current ADP is 61.5, so he's going in the early 5th round. And my exposure to Hockenson is 14.3%, so I have a decent amount of shares to TJ Hockenson. In the situations where Mark Andrews and TJ Hockenson are on the board, I'm taking Hockenson because he's the top receiving option on the Lions. And even with Kenny Galladay on the team last season, he had a market share of 18%. That's a pretty high market share for a tight end. And he's definitely a red zone threat. Last season, inside the 20-yard line, he had a target share of over 20%. And inside the 10-yard line, it was 30%. So when the Lions get closer to the goal line, Hockenson's definitely going to be a guy. And he's going to be a guy that's going to be getting volume. And he's a definite touchdown threat. If you get Hockenson, you're probably only taking 2 tight ends because if Hockenson busts, your team is probably dead. So I think Hockenson is a great target at his ADP. He's a good tight end 1, and he could profile as a really good receiver. And he's going to be in a pass-heavy game script because the Lions are going to be a bad team. Let's just call a spade here. So when the Lions are down multiple touchdowns early, they're going to turn to the passing game with Jared Goff. And who's Jared Goff's top target going to be? It's going to be TJ Hockenson. So we should see him get peppered with targets. And I really like the volume here. And Hockenson's definitely one of my top tight ends for the 2021 season. Coming in at number 4, we have George Kittle. His current ADP is 27.5, so he's going in the early 3rd round. And my exposure to him is 14.3%. And whenever I can get George Kittle and it makes sense, I'm going to go get him. You know, I'm not necessarily reaching in the early 2nd round, but if I'm in the late 2nd round, I might get George Kittle. It just really depends if it makes sense for my build and if I want a guy that has a legit tight end 1 ceiling. I'm probably going to go to Kittle. And Kittle's a guy who's definitely the lead dog on the 49ers offense in terms of the passing game. And had a 24% market share last season when he did play. I really expect more of the same this year from George Kittle. I think he's definitely a guy they're going to feature in that offense. And he's a guy, when he does catch the ball, he's getting yards after the catch as well. He's very talented in the open space, really hard to tackle for defenders. And I think George Kittle's definitely going to have a really good season. And he completely changes your build if you go with George Kittle early. Because if you think about it, if George Kittle busts in those builds, your whole team is going to be dead because you selected him in the 2nd or 3rd round. So in teams that I take George Kittle, I'm not taking another tight end. I'm focusing more on filling out running back and wide receiver. And I'm just getting as many guys there as I possibly can. So getting a guy like George Kittle allows you to just forget the tight end position after that and really just get more ceiling players in those lineups. And he's stackable with Trey Lance too. Trey Lance makes a lot of sense for the playoff weeks, and I think George Kittle is going to end up being a guy with him, like similar to the Mark Andrews-Lamar Jackson relationship. And George Kittle is definitely a guy I'm focusing at the tight end position. Coming in at number 3, we have Anthony FIRKSER. His current ADP is 190.5, so he's going in the late 15th round. And my exposure to him is 19%. So I have a good amount of shares to Anthony FIRKSER, and it's solely based on the fact that he just keeps falling in drafts. And if he's just going to keep falling past his ADP, I'm going to take him because the Tennessee offense has a lot of upside, and Jonnu Smith is not there. Jonnu Smith last season had a market share of 15%, and inside the 20-yard line, his market share was 26.6%. Now, obviously, FIRKSER isn't going to soak up all that because Julio Jones is now on the team, but I see FIRKSER being the guy at tight end for the Titans. And if he's going to be the guy, you got to think he gets at least most of those Jonnu Smith touches. And if he does, then he's probably got some touchdown upside because last season Jonnu Smith did get 8 touchdowns. So if FIRKSER's going to be the tight end that they use in the red zone, it's not really crazy to think that he has, 5 to 7 touchdowns in the bag. And even last season, when FIRKSER wasn't on the field as much as Jonnu Smith, he was only on the field for 32% of the snaps. He still received 55 targets in those snaps. So, it feels like when FIRKSER is on the field, he's getting the ball a good amount, and it looks like the chemistry with Ryan Tannehill's there. So I don't think it's crazy to think in the late rounds of drafts that FIRKSER could be a guy that could pay off in your tight end pool. Because if you're getting FIRKSER, you're probably taking 3 late round tight ends, and you just need one of those 3 guys to go off. And FIRKSER can definitely be that guy on a week basis, right? You don't need him to go off every week, but you need him to have those spikes. And if FIRKSER is going to be getting the tight end volume for the Titans, it's likely that he will have those spike weeks. And in builds where you have A.J. Brown or Julio Jones with Ryan Tannehill, FIRKSER makes a ton of sense because you're completing the stack and you're doing it in one of the last rounds of the draft. So FIRKSER definitely makes sense to me, and he's a guy I'm getting a lot in the late rounds of drafts. Coming in number 2, we have Travis KELCE. His current ADP is 6.8, so he's going the early first round of drafts, and my exposure to him is 19%. Now, whenever I can get Travis KELCE, I'm getting him because he's got the highest floor of any tight end, and you can argue even the highest ceiling. Last season, he averaged 12.4 targets per game. That's an insane amount of targets for a tight end, and really at that point, he's treated as a receiver. He's the ideal tight end to get, and whenever I can in these huge underdog tournaments, I'm getting Travis KELCE because he just changes your entire build. Like I said with George Kittle, if you're getting Travis KELCE in drafts, there's no reason to take any other tight end, because if Travis KELCE busts, then your whole team is dead anyways. So why not just load up at the other positions? And KELCE's ceiling is easily the highest of any tight end. He had 26% market share last season, over 100 receptions, 11 touchdowns, a 25% target share in the red zone. He's just the tight end, and I don't think it's really close if I had the choice of any tight end. Now, getting KELCE does come at a cost premium, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. But I think in Underdog, where you need those outlier outcomes, having Travis KELCE definitely helps those builds because you can get other volatile options at running back and wide receiver that could have those ceiling weeks, and you have that steady-handed tight end. I really think that makes sense, and I'm going to keep getting Travis KELCE whenever I can in the first round. Coming in at number 1, we have Rob Gronkowski. His current ADP is 157.8, so he's going in the early 13th round, and my exposure to him is 33.8%. So that is a high exposure, but he's typically my first tight end if I'm taking 3 late round tight ends. So in those builds, I'm taking 3 tight ends and hoping for one of them to have a ceiling week. And I'm not expecting Gronkowski to go off every week. That's not necessarily the thought process behind that type of a build, right? I'm taking 3 tight ends in the last 5 rounds of the draft, and I'm just hoping that I get some solid spike weeks. And Gronkowski is a guy that can definitely do that. He had a 12% market share last season, so it's not low. It's not necessarily high either, but he had 7 receiving touchdowns, with 5 of them coming inside the 20-yard line. So once the Buccaneers get into the red zone, Gronkowski's definitely a factor, and obviously we know that the chemistry's there with Tom Brady. On teams where I either need a 3 tight end pool in late rounds of the draft, or I'm going for the Buccaneers offense, right? Gronkowski definitely makes sense because he caps off that Tampa Bay stack, where you take Chris Godwin early in the draft, or even Mike Evans, and then you get Tom Brady around pick 100. Then you get Gronkowski to cap off the stack, and he looks really good. And he's a guy that is going to be very volatile, but at the late rounds of the draft, you have to kind of play into that volatility to have the highest upside possible. And I think with his red zone presence and his chemistry with Tom Brady, I think it makes a lot of sense to think that Rob Gronkowski can have certain spike weeks and can provide the upside we're looking for in late rounds of drafts where you're taking multiple tight ends. Rob Gronkowski is definitely going to be my highest exposed tight end going into the 2021 season, and he offers a lot of upside on Underdog. If you went on to enjoy the video, make sure you slap a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to be firing off NFL content all season long. And if you want to try out teamriseorfall.com, make sure you use code TEAMMAY for $5 off. And you can find me on Twitter at TeamMayDFS. I'll catch you in the next one.